Good morning, everybody. This is Tuesday, the 9th of June. I need to think about that because days are merging into each other. But I'd like to welcome you to this week's Question Time Live. We have on our panel Tania Bowers, who is the Group Legal Counsel for APSCo and is well known to you all, especially anyone who's been tuning into these sessions. And then today also we have Dugald McIntosh, who is the Head of Enterprise Accounts and Solutions Director at Capita Resourcing. Capita is known by most people as a huge organisation that's an MSP and RPO programs being run often for the public sector. And Dugald has a lot of experience, 16 years experience in the recruitment company, running big programs. There are, going through Capita at this moment in time, although maybe not today, I don't know, but around 19,000 hires that go through in any one year. The supply chain has also 400 recruitment consultancy businesses that supply through Capita into the end client. It also actually has, which is something fairly new to me, a vetting business, in fact the largest one in the UK, but also a marketing stroke advertising agency as part of that resourcing group. So interesting. Dugald, welcome. Thank you for doing this for us. And then let me come on to our next panel member. We have Richard Prime. Richard is the CEO of Sonovate, and Sonovate gives working capital finance to recruitment companies. It's given about £1.5 billion out there to fund invoicing in over 40 countries. And when it launched in 2011, was really quite a disruptor to the market with a new way of doing things, and certainly that has worked exceptionally well, used by a number of APSCo members and some that aren't APSCo members. Richard's background is pure recruitment. He spent 15 years in the recruitment market, ending his recruitment specific career as an MD of one of S3's businesses. So he knows his stuff from a recruitment point of view, as well as from that funding point of view. Richard, thank you very much for joining us, and I welcome you in. I do think that's a snazzy beard that I don't recognise you, even though I've known you for quite a number of years. And congratulations. I don't know whether Tania's going to grow anything anytime soon. I'm hoping I'm not.
I hope not.
Let's hope not.
My hair's long enough.
The way it's going. Yeah, mine's way long enough. Okay, why don't I welcome our members? Can I come to you, Dugald? Give us a flavour of what's been going on in the last 8, 9, 11 weeks at Capita. How is the business feeling? How's the market going?
Hi, Anne. I guess first stage was just fueled by adrenaline, really, as we reacted, and we moved all of our operations very quickly to remote working. And I think we were, thanking the Lord for Microsoft 365 and Teams, which we'd obviously migrated to, I think, about 18 months previously. So I guess the moving and being able to continue to deliver our service was actually more straightforward than maybe we had thought. And I guess the initial impact looked very different in different parts of our business. I think we're expecting it to be very, particularly, those of us that had been in the 2008 crisis, it was a bit like a balloon going down and everything being thrown out of the balloon. But the reality was, actually, we saw a very different impact in different parts of our business. So, for example, our retail businesses have been hit very hard. Obviously, their order books dried up overnight. I think the enterprise businesses, so where we're delivering to our big enterprise clients, and particularly the public sector, suddenly, I think we're very fortunate to have lots of public sector business. I'm not quite sure I would have said that perhaps a year ago, but suddenly, obviously, that became a very good thing to be part of, because the public sector not only, I think, wanted to keep the taps on to keep UK PLC going, but also a lot of our clients were reacting to COVID themselves, and so needed to bring people into their businesses in order to be able to solve different problems, and so we're able to put resources immediately on that work. Had some effect in counterbalancing, I think, some of the shortfalls elsewhere. Not all, but it certainly helped in terms of keeping the tills ringing.
Yeah. Look, I know that
I might have lost you, Anne. You're frozen.
Ah, okay. I don't know if I've frozen to it. In that case, let me come on to Richard, and I'll come back to you, Dugald, if that's okay. Richard, can you see me? Am I frozen in your world, or pretty much
all good?
Good. Thank you. I've got that princess thing, being in a frozen world. But anyway, Richard, from your point of view, I know you've got about 100 staff, but of course you've got that client base out there, and one would say they're probably the small to medium-sized business. Maybe they come up to about £40 million turnover would typically, I think, be your client base. How are you finding that they reacted initially, and how have things changed now?
Yeah, look, I think the initial reaction for them in the conversations that I had was this kind of element of flipping from sort of peacetime to wartime, really. I think everybody was feeling reasonably chipper about things, albeit kind of focused, because obviously our world is contract temp, freelance funding. So obviously there was so much focus around the kind of IR35 piece and everything that was flowing through from there, that I think everybody then had to jump into kind of what do they do in respect to this. So I think there was a kind of element of realizing that this is a challenge, trying to figure out what's going to be suitable from the government schemes and trying to keep up to date with those. And I think that was the initial piece. And I think the big one was the furlough piece, and people understanding that and utilizing that as a tool for them. So I think that calmed things down for a lot of people, because I think that was a big pinch point on kind of cash and liquidity from that perspective. Generally, I think what we've seen now, these number of weeks afterwards, is that most people I'm speaking to are feeling like they are what I almost call like a steady flight. The dips, the kind of drops come off, and now it feels like they're kind of trading at that level. If I'm trying to pull the positive, that if we want to call it the pipeline for June, seemed to be a bit better than the pipeline for May, albeit down, but it seemed to be a little bit better pipeline for June rather than May.
We're certainly seeing contract market was not hit as badly, obviously, as perm across all different markets. We've seen the May pipeline actually moving steadily upwards, nowhere near back to what it was, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, which is a good thing. Dougal, I think we've got you back. I can see you. I don't know if I'm still frozen in your world.
No,
but
I can certainly hear you.
Excellent. Then let me come back to you. So there was that panic stations at the beginning, but have people, had those 600 staff members that are in Capita Resourcing, have they got into something like a new normal?
Well, so what's happened is, look, you're absolutely right. I think perm stopped overnight. Contingent actually held up much better than I was expecting. A lot of the contingent workers we deliver to our customers are in the professional space. But with contractors, I think historically, whilst a lot of us have got used to working from home, that's not the case often with the contractor. We provide a lot of project managers, IT, software design engineers, etc. So those guys tend to still work in offices, I think. But what happened is that our end clients enabled them to be able to work from home very quickly and kept them running, which I think was really important, which was something that I think was a bit of a surprise, but a very welcome one. And what we saw, I think, was definitely saw a big dip in terms of the number of orders. We are starting to see that coming back, probably maybe 30% less than the numbers that we saw pre-COVID. And I think the other thing that I think we're seeing our clients reprioritizing projects. So they're coming back differently. So the shape is ultimately going to be very different to where we came in. And I think what we saw is that we initially modeled a V. There was this kind of V that went down in July and then a very quick recovery. And I think the reality is now that it's looking much more like a U, and where that endpoint will be is going to be different from where we came in to COVID in March. So organisations are taking this opportunity to ultimately think about their own businesses, how work gets done, what's a priority. They're thinking about their own liquidity. They're thinking about their own customer base, and all that thinking is now in the mix in terms of the future direction. We're thinking it as a big enterprise business, and our customers are thinking about it. What it looks like is still very unclear.
It is a chance for organisations to rejig, to look at who they would like to be when they grow up and change that starting point rather than sticking plasters. But I think a lot of businesses are looking for a big reorganisation. Richard, Dugald talked about refinancing and looking at their liquidity. And I know that was about end user clients, but what about the recruitment market? Are you finding your clients, one, how far did they drop? I know you're big on stats within Sonovate. How far did the market drop from a contract point of view? And how are people thinking it's going to come back up?
Well, I mean, look, just broadly on a couple of those things. I think by nature, certainly the agencies that we work with, you know, they are genuinely your small to medium size agencies getting up to maybe sort of 40, 50 million turnover. They're not in big co. And I do think that the DNA of a lot of those businesses is that they invest to go forward. So they're kind of always going to put bums on seats, thinking sales, thinking about, can we get these people in? And they're investing for scale to go forward. So the kind of DNA is investment for that future. Whereas I think that what's had to happen, and some, a bunch of the conversations I've had, is that people have to really do some stress testing on their business. They have to sort of think, okay, revenue, what was our kind of budgeted revenue? You know, what are the, and I do think they've got to do some pretty hard down stress testing, and I think go pretty big on that, and then understand kind of the revenue impact as to what does that actually then impact on their cost base, and then how does that then fall through to their bottom line from a cash perspective, because ultimately they've got to make sure that they survive and come through this is the key thing, and understanding probably their finances better than ever. I think that's one thing that I've certainly been talking to people, you know, at times when you maybe don't have your finger on the pulse of some of those metrics. I think people now have got them on more of a weekly basis, monthly basis for sure. And I think in the future, they'll take them forward and be better equipped at knowing those numbers. In terms of what did we see, again, just as Dugald mentioned there, you know, the reality is we got caught up a little bit in terms of the actual dropping of volumes, a little bit with the back end of the IR35 piece. So there was a lot of people coming off contract, then getting kind of rechanneled as to that. I mean, look, I don't want to go into the warren of IR35, but you get my point. There was contract change and different ways in which people were looking at their contract numbers. So it definitely softened gradually to about, we've seen about 25, 28% less activity. And when we call about activity, ultimately it's the days and hours and weeks that are out there in the market that ultimately we provide funding for. But that does include the kind of IR35 piece that was happening there. So that's been the drop off. I would agree that there's quite a lot of sentiment that would suggest it's not a V-shaped recovery. There are split views on that for sure. But we as a business have definitely planned for the worst and hoped for better. And I think most of the businesses now, if they're being sensible, should think along those lines.
Okay. It was mentioned early on, one of the biggest things with regard to COVID and what's been going on has been furlough. Dugald, in Capita, have you furloughed staff?
Yeah, we have.
I mean, you've got 600 of them. So what kind of percentage have been furloughed?
Oh, so there's two things that have happened at the same time. So we have used the furlough scheme. So essentially what we've done is, you know, like any recruitment business, it's not the first time I've been through these big drops, but the first time anything like, you know, COVID, obviously, and the speed. And the furlough scheme has been, you know, obviously a fantastic safety net for our business, because ultimately what you do is you right size your operations, don't you, to the demand. Yeah. And in the recruitment business, the way you do that is, you know, you release recruitment heads ultimately. Yeah. And so the furlough scheme has been, you know, a fantastic place to put people whilst we're waiting for our order book to fill back up again. Yeah. So we have furloughed people. But the other thing that's happened is that we've also been asked to run a couple of big projects on behalf of the government. One of them was the NHS returners, or the clinicians coming back into the NHS. So they've all needed to be obviously onboarded back into the NHS. All the background checks have to be done. Well, that's what we do, right? So we've done that for the government. So we put a lot of people quite quickly onto that project. So we're able to put people onto there. But we've also used the furlough scheme. I can't, to be honest, and I can't tell you as a percentage, it would be a relatively small number, I think, probably compared to our competitors, because we've had this massive, great project. We've had, I think, over 200 people working on that. So, you know, we have used the furlough scheme. And the other thing I think that it is also clear is that for a lot of people, the furlough scheme has also worked quite well, because people frankly can't work from home for all sorts of reasons. Yeah, they've got, you know, whether it's young family, there's vulnerable people, there's all sorts of things that mean they've been impacted by COVID, whether it's because we haven't got any work or they simply can't work. And obviously the furlough scheme, again, has been a very useful place to be able to put people, which meant that they haven't lost their jobs. And then when we're ready, we can then bring them back into the business again, as the, you know, hopefully the order book starts to fill up.
Yeah, let me come to Tania if it's okay. Tania, we always get a lot of questions on furlough. So bear with me if I put some forward to, but it's the regular thing we get most questions. So I'm going to ask you a few questions that we've had through from our members. What I would say to anyone out there in the audience, if you have a question, get it in that chat box as soon as you can, because what always seems to happen is we have a few questions at the beginning and then a whole clutch of them at the end, and we run out of time. So you have the questions, let's go for it. Tania, there's a question here from Daniel Sugarman, who said, I have made furlough claims for April and May and received the funds. I've been requested to make a furlough claim for one of our contractors from the 1st of May. Is it possible to make a claim for this contractor for the May period in my June claim, even if I've already submitted a May claim for my permanent employees? Can someone do a backtrack furlough claim for a contractor? Tania.
Thanks, Anne. I've just double checked this because obviously it's quite a complex one. You can only make one claim in respect of each claim period for each PAYE scheme you run. So the first question, I suppose, is, are the contractors on the same PAYE scheme as the permanent employees? Because if they are, then my understanding is you can't run another claim once you've already made a claim for that period. However, what it does say is contact HMRC, because a potential problem could be coming up, because you can make claims in advance and people may already have claimed for June but want to add new people because of the cut-off point on the 10th of June, and that it says contact HMRC to discuss, because I think allowances can be made. So if he has already run the claim for that scheme, I'd suggest he contacts HMRC.
Okay, I've got another furlough question here, so bear with me. Has HMRC gone live with the furlough clawback scheme yet? In the news, Macron has pledged to undertake 50,000 checks on businesses that have benefited from the French kind of furlough type scheme in an attempt to track down fraudsters. Is there something like that going to happen in the UK?
There's some draft legislation that's under consultation until the end of the week that will enable HMRC to claw back if they think that furlough was wrongly or fraudulently used. I think we're going to respond to the consultation. We're going to make clear that, you know, the vast majority of people were acting in good faith. It wasn't, the guidance often wasn't clear, it changed every day. The Treasury directions, which supersede the guidance, came out afterwards. And it's just not fair. I don't sense that they're going to go on some major clawback exercise, but obviously we are feeding in, we're making, you know, we're making our views known about this. So at some point there will be they will have the right to claw back fraudulently paid furlough, but we're not quite sure yet what the extent of that clawback scheme will be. What I would say is if you're continuing to furlough people, really do document your decision making. Hopefully you've been doing that all along. Save the documents off of government, download the documents and save them as documents, the documents that you're relying on from gov.uk when you make those decisions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and we've been very clear at APSCo because we've had historically a lot of questions. Can someone still be doing some work with me while I've been furloughing them? No, you can't. Don't do that. Most people feel the furlough scheme has been very generous. I certainly think the changes that are happening in the next few months are more generous than anyone thought they were going to be. So let's not anybody fall foul by taking the mickey out of a system that's been there to help us. Can I ask another question, Tania, while I've got you on furlough? Someone was saying, I understand that the furlough scheme is closing at the end of June, but I also read somewhere that tomorrow is the final day. I'm a bit confused. What is it? What are the changes that are taking place? And realistically, what do I need to do, I think, by the 10th of June? Can you give us an outline of that?
From the 30th of June, you cannot furlough anyone unless they have previously been furloughed. They don't have to be on furlough as of the 30th of June, but they have to have been furloughed at some point for 3 weeks since the scheme opened back in March. The tomorrow is important because effectively it's 3 calendar weeks until the 30th of June. So it's practically the last day that you can put a new person or agency worker employee onto furlough. And that's why it's important. Because it's that final day that you can put a new person onto furlough. If somebody has been furloughed previously, they're currently working, but then either you or a client wants to furlough them after the 1st of July, as long as they've got that 3-week furlough period in the past, then you will be able to do that. But that's why tomorrow is so important.
Can you just outline, do you have an idea when Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is going to give us more details and some clarification about the rest of the furlough scheme through the summer? It's
coming out on Friday. We were told that yesterday by Bays. It's still planned to come out on Friday. It sounds like they're still knee deep in policy and writing it, as they always seem to be. They seem to take it to the wire. So I would expect it to be a bit later in the day, but I don't know. But I'm expecting it on Friday the 12th. That was the date that was promised.
I find it really hard to think all of these big decisions seem to come out on a bloody Friday afternoon, when actually if they came out on a Monday, we'd have a whole week there and then. Otherwise we just worry about them or write them up in APSCo's way, you know, write them up and get them, I think, over the weekend. I don't know what the government are on about, but anyway, okay. So if you haven't furloughed anybody that you want to furlough at some stage in the future, tomorrow is the deadline for you to get them into 3 weeks worth of furlough before the end of June. Don't forget that. If you want more clarification, you can speak to the APSCo legal helpline, who will give you more clarification with regard to that. But it's an important deadline if you want to furlough someone in the future. Okay, let me come off the furlough scheme if that's okay. If we look at what changes I think are happening in the market. One of the big things that we're predicting at APSCo is a growth of startups. I think there are members of staff that have been furloughed in recruitment companies that have spent time at home thinking maybe I could do this for myself, and they've had a bit more time to be able to do it. And there are people that perhaps are working for businesses that they're not sure about their future after COVID. Richard, startups are something that you know a lot about, because obviously a lot of startups will use Sonovate services to help them fund their contractor base rather than overtrading. Are you getting a flavour of more startups happening?
Yes, I mean, it was a data point that we jumped on because historically, you know, we looked after the global financial crisis and there was a significant uptick in terms of the number of agencies that were set up because there was just a mass kind of reduction. And I know it's not a great subject, but that's the reality. In the big downturns in recruitment, fundamentally, you know, sales staff as that variable cost get cut. I think the furlough schemes have definitely I think they've done their job ultimately. I think to a great extent, they have allowed businesses to use the furloughing structure to make sense of what their business is like going through this and what it's going to be like on the other side of that. We definitely saw a period where the startups kind of halted for obvious reasons. Everyone's a bit nervous, but we are now starting to see in the last couple of months the startups are coming and upticking again from there. I think it's going to be an interesting one through the summer where companies are maybe going to have to start looking at the furlough scheme. How much of their business can they support that ultimately then will lead into some redundancies that come through? I know it's not a great subject, but I think it will happen if we're being realistic. But then if those individuals have been working from home, I think it's actually a period of time, although it's a pretty false working from home environment, right? Because everybody's broadly speaking doing it. It's not the real world. But I do think it does give those individuals 3-4 months where they've been trying to get their head around the idea of whether that's an environment, speaking to other colleagues that are working from home that haven't been furloughed, and how they're thinking about that. So some people, it might be, I think I can do that. I'm away from the office now. Other folk might be feeling, I really miss it. You know, I miss the work environment. I miss my colleagues. The idea of, you know, being on my own and starting up something is not for me. So I think there's going to be some interesting playouts, but there will definitely be the uptick of startups for sure.
I know you may well have some facts or figures on this, some data. Do you have any idea how many companies might have started up so far this year?
So this year we've seen just about 3,200 agencies set up in 2020 to date. But last year, 2019, there was 8,500. The year before, 2018, just over 11,000 agency startups. So, and if you go back kind of 2 and 3 years, you see about 50, late 50s of those that are still trading in terms of percent of those. So those folks that continue to trade through and are still live as a business in years kind of 2 to 4 after that. So a pretty decent success rate of people that will trade themselves beyond that kind of 3 to 4 year period.
Yeah. Dugald, would you worry whether any of your staff are likely to go off and set up on their own? Is that something that happens to you at Capita Resourcing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've seen it, haven't we, in the recruitment space for many years, and the barriers to entry are obviously dropping all the time, aren't they? You know, you've got businesses like Richard's business helping with liquidity. You can access all the SaaS systems very cheaply. You know, candidate networks are free for everybody, aren't they? So, you know, I can absolutely see, you know, entrepreneurial individuals choosing to use this as the moment to set up their businesses. I suspect, you know, it's going to be tough for them, right? You know, and I imagine, but however, I suspect that, you know, individuals with, you know, very good knowledge of niche markets that are going to be continuing to grow, there's going to be good opportunity out there for them, and a lot of people are going to want to take that opportunity, I suspect. Also, I think there's another thing, which is, people might feel nervous about setting up a new business in this time, but the reality, are we going to see another pandemic like this impacting businesses in the way, so what I mean by that is, you might be a little bit nervous putting all your savings into a new company if, suddenly in a year's time, you're not going to get anything for any government protection schemes. However, people will be making a bet over whether they think that is likely or not, and if they think it's relatively unlikely, they might choose that this is the right time to set up their own businesses.
Yeah, look, I think if a question's come through about, it's been reported only this morning that the USA is actually officially in recession at the minute. I wonder what you think, Dugald, and then I'll come on to you, Richard, afterwards, actually. What do you think that means for the UK and the rest of the world? Are we going to head, would you think, into some kind of global recession? Is the UK definitely going to be drawn into recession? Because we may not see another COVID-19 for a period of time, but it may be we are heading to some kind of recession. What's your view?
I think that's inevitable, isn't it? No surprise, right? Everybody is expecting this to happen, and I think it will come back, but the reality is it's not going to come back for everybody in the same way. And so people and businesses will be significantly impacted. I think the other thing we're all looking out for is this going to be the moment to reset our industrial strategy, for example? Green energy, the way that we get to work, the way, is this going to be the opportunity? And governments, frankly, around the world are going to be the ones probably that we're going to be expected to spend, right, to drive these economies out of recession. How are they going to do that? Are they going to do that through long-term planning, or are they going to be putting money back into the same old industries? Now, I know what I want, but I think that all of us are going to be waiting to see what happens. And the other thing is, how much global cooperation are we going to see? Yeah, or are we going to see trade barriers? Are we going to see nationalistic policies? Again. I don't think anybody actually knows, the answer. That we got a big government election. We got an election in November, haven't we, in the US, which may well influence things considerably. So I think that I haven't got the answers, I'm afraid, Anne. But certainly, I personally hope that we're going to be taking this opportunity to build an economy which looks slightly different. There's going to be huge opportunities in that, but that's going to require quite a lot of I guess leadership, not only nationally but probably globally.
Yeah, it's interesting. Richard, what's your view? Are we going to see, there's an opportunity, isn't there, for a fundamental change, but I suppose what we have to recognise is it's a government that we've elected somehow. I wasn't part of that, by the way, but anyway, a government that seems to have been elected that historically may not have been the government for looking at a greener world out there. Do you think this is time? There's definitely an opportunity, but is it the time that we're going to see a fundamental change? Are big organisations, big corporates going to get taxed to fund what's been going on and taxed to fund some changing what's going on out there? Or is it going to be back to normal?
Look, I think there's that first part of the question about recession. I think there's some inevitability around, some of those issues in the short term. Look, I think the government is going to have to look first and foremost. I think the government is. I think they're trying to have an orderly approach to unemployment. Is my view. I think that they're trying to manage the element that they don't want to see kind of this mass unemployment, coming into the economy. So I think there's an art of controlling that. And the flip side of that is obviously there needs to be a kind of spending journey going forward to drive this. Clearly, there will be some elements of where corporations and taxes come into play for big co's. I mean, I don't have particularly strong views on their direction there, but it would make sense that they've got to start drawing taxes in from somewhere. But I do think there's opportunity. I think on the negative side, some job roles are probably, they are going to change, and maybe they don't come back in the same way that they were before. But I think that this does create maybe an acceleration of some of the stuff that was inevitable, and people are just now accelerating it. Big companies really looking at their kind of digital strategy, really looking about their efficiencies and how technology can help them there. No doubt, in the world we work in around recruitment and staffing, some of these businesses will look at what have they done through this period. Has any of it been more efficient as to how they think about recruitment? And I think, hopefully it will make companies as well look inside themselves and just think about how do we restructure ourselves for the economy going forward, and where those opportunities lie. I certainly think if you're in tech, cybersecurity, cloud, those sorts of things, there's going to be strong areas of big company spend there, and then obviously the infrastructure projects that Dugald mentioned. So I think some of that will drive how we come out of this period.
I mean, and part of that moving forward is Brexit, which has been relatively easy to forget for the last few months. But realistically, Tania, do you have any news or any views on what's going to happen with Brexit? Are we going to manage to do a deal? Is there a real appetite to do a deal before the end of the year for moving forward?
Well, it's only really what I read. I think the general view is there's likely to be some type of deal, but closer to October, November. It'll probably be quite small and discrete areas because of the scale, and then there'll be longer periods to sort out other things such as services. I think a key area for us actually is data protection, and that's slightly outside of the Brexit deal. That's all about data adequacy, and the Information Commissioner's Office in this country are trying to get the EU to agree that we have an adequate data system to get data adequacy, because without that there's going to be an enormous amount of administration and paper trail to legitimise any data transfers in and out of Europe at the end of the year. And that's a huge issue for recruitment companies because our business is data. I think I'm getting a lot of calls for clarity from members. What I would say is there are, and I've covered that in the quarterly board briefing that we're publishing today, there are transition check documents on gov.uk. Unfortunately, gov.uk can be oversimplistic and it just sends you down rabbit warrens. But fundamentally, it is helpful to do that. And actually, if you read it, they are advising on a no-deal Brexit. So in effect, what they're telling you to do is in effect a no-deal Brexit. I mean, obviously, if things change towards the end of the year, then that guidance will be updated. But I think businesses do have to now just start acting and work on the guidance that is available.
Yeah. Richard, you've got customers with contracts in 40 different countries. Are you finding your client base are worried about Brexit, or has it been a bit forgotten in the last few months?
Yeah, honestly, the stuff that's sort of fed into me, and I think in the broader team, I think it has been a little bit forgotten, to be honest with you. Again, look, I'm not big, broadly speaking, the kind of businesses we support are not huge oil tankers. They can by virtue be more nimble. Honestly, it was very much kind of the IR35 piece and just realigning and getting themselves clarity, because as that was coming into play, and then really looking at kind of their business and the impact of this pandemic. Honestly, I haven't had any great conversations on it for a good number of months, to be honest with you.
Dugald, I mean, Capita is a mainly British company. I mean, you know, fundamentally a British company providing people into a British environment. Is Brexit something that has any impact whatsoever on your business?
Yeah, it does. It does. And we do have operations globally. We have a big support business in South Africa and in India. We, you know, in Germany, Netherlands, US, you know, so we operate multiple countries. Just the balance of our businesses in the UK. I mean, look, first, I'd say, yes, it's been forgotten about, number one. Two, I think we're all thinking, just as we're starting to get into recovery mode on COVID, we're about to enter, I guess, the pressure cooker, you know, that is going to be, you know, and I suspect it will be an arm wrestle right down to the wire again, yeah, which I would say is really unhelpful, frankly. And I remember, you know, when we were doing this, you know, it feels like such a long time ago now, last year, you know, we were pulling people in, we were doing exactly as Tania suggested, planning for no deal, this is what needs to happen, and then last minute, you know, and I suspect the same thing will happen. And I can tell you as a manager, I'm so bored of it. You know, what we want is a bit of certainty that we can plan for and work towards. And then the last point I would say is, it's interesting. COVID has actually taught us something, and I would suggest, again, it's upon us all to look at different countries and figure out and regions and figure out how they've responded to coronavirus, because I think that'll probably tell us a lot about how we might need to work with them post Brexit. And you think about, you know, so we talk a lot about the furlough scheme as being this fantastic government initiative, and it is, but it's not unique. We just copied what most of Europe had essentially already done. Then we look at the US and the way that they have handled things. Now, they're a very different country, as many of us will know who spent time there, working there. You know, it feels familiar, but the reality is it is very different in terms of their socio-political model. And you look at the unemployment numbers and the impact and the speed of that impact in the US, and obviously that's been prevented because of the furlough scheme that we've had over here. But that is common, I think, for the most part across most European countries. So again, what I would suggest is it's an interesting thing to look at, you know, some of these countries that we're going to be doing business with, India, China, US, etc., etc. You know, this is the world that we're going to be operating in. So, you know, I would say I would like our politicians to be working collaboratively to get the best deal we can in order to protect our economies and our people, rather than some kind of ideological point scoring. But then, you know, I guess I would say that because that's perhaps, you know, where I come from. But yeah, I think it's going to be unhelpful if we're going to be staring down the barrel of uncertainty through the autumn.
Yeah, I mean, and I suspect we will. Let's come back to certainty within our own businesses. Obviously, we're working from home. We can see we're all at home. Richard, how are you going to bring your people back to, isn't it London and Cardiff? You've got offices. How are you going to bring your staff back to offices? When and how?
So at the moment, we've basically got a work from home policy until September. So that's our kind of holding pattern, and we're just observing everything that's coming through in terms of the government advice and what the right structure is there. We're reasonably fortunate in certainly our London office. We're not sort of saturated in terms of bodies per kind of square foot in there, but that's just no conscious effort. It's just how we are set up there at the moment. And then, you know, a little bit more densely populated in Cardiff. I think the key thing that we've committed to as a business is that we've asked broadly speaking, our folks to, you know, take it on the chin, work from home, and do everything they can to be business as usual. So I think from our perspective, it's just right that we now listened to those folks as to what have they felt about this period of time, and how do we, you know, think about the structure going forward. I think there are pockets. I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say, you know, look, we have a sales team, you know, they're broadly speaking, they'll be in the office, they'll work their day through the office. You know, maybe sort of areas there where, you know, in consultation, we listen to what they think might be the right balance. And I think we need to be more open to the flexibility of those wants and see how they work for us as a business. And I think probably then the other overarching thing is just, I think some of those external things, just the whole transport and the whole element of what that is for folks in terms of getting to and from work, and trying to be flexible with that. You know, we've got staff, you know, London-based staff that are commuting in. Then I think we've got to try and understand those external factors. So I think a slow progress and just take stock as to how we can navigate that in and around those things really is what we're doing as a business.
Yeah, Dugald, what about you at Capita? With all of those staff, I know there's different offices in different locations. Have you done, which Richard has done, is given clarity to his staff that don't even think about it till September, which is exactly what I've done with the APSCo staff actually. Have you done something similar or managed that in a different way?
So I guess, so there's a number of different ways to answer this. So first of all, this is where it's really helpful being part of Capita. There's 62,000 people in the UK. We have, this is where we've got resources that we can access to be able to help us go back to work. So we've got, a whole infrastructure business who are going to be able to advise around health and safety, do the risk assessments, think about the footprint in terms of our offices and the environment that we will go back into. Okay, so all of those guys are very busy now, doing that across all of our Capita businesses. We've got 120, I think, at least offices in the UK, just in the UK, right? Now, different businesses are going to have have experienced, I guess, remote working. I'll put it that way, in a different way. So for our business, it's worked quite well, right? In the resourcing space, we can all use SaaS tools, and people are working relatively well from home. Other parts of the Capita business, they are quite keen to get back into offices. So they're noticing the impact of remote working on their productivity, for example, and their performance. So they're quite keen to get back. But obviously, as they go back, they can't, the number of people that can go back into those offices are reduced. We need to be able to provide, all sorts of equipment in order to make sure they're safe. So all of those type of things. So what we have essentially done is we've gone out to our population. We've given them all a questionnaire, asked them how they're getting on, so we're trying to assess, who should come back when, not only from a business perspective, but also how people are personally feeling about it. We're trying to understand the impact of our productivity of remote working. And what we will have is a phased come back to the offices plan. We will probably be in the resourcing business at the moment. It looks, hopefully you can still hear me. It looks like my internet's gone a bit unstable. Other Capita businesses are going to go ahead of us, so we're going to learn from them.
Okay, good. You've frozen and I've lost you. I'm going to just, because of that, bear with me, I'm going to come away from you and I'm going to go back to Tania with some of the other issues. We've been talking about coming back to offices. What happens to member of staff from a legal point of view if there are members of staff that do not want to come back to the office and prefer working from home? What can we do about that? Someone's actually refusing to come back to the office, say in September, October, or whenever the time is right.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. It's a really difficult one. I think, as Dugald and Richard said, I think the more you involve your people in the decision-making process, I mean, it's not ultimately their decision, but the more they are involved in the process of what's being done and taking into account their concerns, the less likely you are, hopefully, to have refuseniks at the end who just refuse to come in. And then I think it is a case of looking at them on a case-by-case basis, looking, do they have genuine concerns? Do they have genuine mental health issues, which we were mentioning last week? Do they have specific needs, or should they be shielding? and really try and accommodate them as far as you are able. As I said before, ultimately you can go down a disciplinary route, but that really should be a last case. And I just think the more you involve everybody in the entire process and the better the communication is, probably the less likely you're going to get it. We are hearing through the help desk quite a certain degree of impatience, I suppose, from some members about wanting to get back in the office, which is understandable, but I think it is worth not rushing it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what I would say is, I mean, Dugald covered as part of a huge business, that they've got part of the business can advise them with regard to how people can come back and distancing and screens and all of that kind of stuff. For the smaller businesses, I would say to APSCo members out there listening, there is a fantastic risk assessment that we've got on our COVID-19 resource hub. It's work that was done by Squire Patton Boggs and is part of a big weightier tome about unlocking lockdown, but there's a brief version of that that's really more about the risk assessment that is also there. We're using that at APSCo. A number of our members are using it. It's really very good. So I would say if you don't have the resources that Dugald's got to hand, have a look at this one. It will work for you, I'm sure, and is a very useful tool. Tania, can I come to you on another legal question? Can we follow a redundancy process whilst people are on furlough? And how do we do it remotely with regard to consultation and things? And should notice monies be paid at 80% or should they be paid at 100% of somebody's salary?
Our view is that yes, if you really have taken the decision that there's no way you can take all of your staff back at the end of the furlough process, or you're looking at specific roles that just no longer exist, then you can follow the process whilst on furlough. In theory, it shouldn't be that much harder because you can do the consultations remotely. I mean, this sort of conferencing, you can have the person in attendance as the individual's companion on the video call. On the face of it, it shouldn't be that much harder. However, the reality is it's not quite the same, and people obviously can duck and dive a bit when they want to. And if they're absolutely refusing to cooperate, then, I mean, normally with that sort of thing, you end up sending special delivery letters and that sort of thing to make sure that they've received notice that they need to get in contact with you, which again isn't very nice. But, you know, if somebody is on furlough and is absolutely refusing to stay in touch. So, I mean, that might be worth just being clear to people in a policy as to what they're expected, their behaviour is expected when they're on furlough.
Would you need to pay them at 80% or 100% of their salary?
Has to be paid at 100%, although you can top up the furlough effectively. That's our understanding, that you can top up the furlough. Any redundancy payments or ex gratia payments can't come out of the furlough.
Right, okay, well that's fair enough. Okay. Can I come to you? We're heading toward the end of our session. Dugald, can you give me a quick overview of your planning at such a big RPO MSP and outsourced business? What planning have you done with budget forecasts for the end of this year? I mean, what's changed? How have you planned for that change? What drop have you planned for instance, if any drop at all?
So we've modelled a V, a U, an L. Just about every single letter in the alphabet has been modelled, I think. And so we've gone all the way to the end of 2021 now. Is the reality. Now, I'm not, not saying that that's all been fun, and it's frankly sometimes a bit of a distraction where you just want to get on and run the business, rather than trying to predict what's going to happen in 18 months' time. You know, that's I guess where we are in terms of budgeting planning. We're a big business, so that's sensible, yeah, to really try and understand what that might look like. And I think the reality is, you know, we sell MSPs, RPOs. You know, we know there's a 6-month sales cycle. There's another 6 months to implement those. You know, so there's some predictions what you can do, but I think a lot of it is still, you know, relatively difficult to know. So my focus has been look after your people, look after your customers, protect your liquidity. That's the 2020 challenge, if you like. And somebody said to me, I think, you know, and I think this is a great analogy, it's a bit like a slow bike race. Yeah, your job is not to fall off, okay, and make sure you're still in the game at the end of the race. Yeah, you know, I think that's the I feel that that's my primary responsibility right now.
Well, I'm sure that will work. Richard, both with you, with Sonovate as a business, but the business that you're providing the businesses that you're providing funding to, how are they planning to grow? We know contract hasn't dropped off as much as perm, so they're in a better position than some APSCo members out there. What's the planning process for them?
Yeah, so look, by the way, I agree with Dougal. I do think you've got to do a load of different planning and stress testing, and I totally agree with look after your people first, your customers, and liquidity. I think that's great advice, whether you're big or small, quite frankly. You know, I think for the majority of our businesses, I would certainly stress there are some advantages at times to being small. So you've got to look at where can you be agile to identify the opportunities, you know, whether that is, you know, some of the obvious. Are you going to trade in a different geography? Are you going to trade into a different sector? Have you got the ability to do that? And also, have you even got an ability to just think about additional kind of services and revenues outside of maybe your absolute traditional placing individuals into clients? Maybe think about the impact of, you know, furloughing from some of the bigger agencies. Where is it that there's less competition in the market? You know, there's just less salespeople that are fighting for traction in the market. Can you really focus your attention as a small business to, you know, to look at those things that can get the results? I think they've just got to as well just really understand those good old traditional kind of KPI inputs that actually make a difference, and really focus on those ones, so that you're not you know, spinning your wheels and not actually clear on what's gonna help you through. So I think that's key for everybody to do that. But yeah, I would just say we're doing it in Sonovate, and I think it's good messaging from our customers, exactly what Dougal said there about look after your people and your clients. Be mindful of liquidity, but also just really understand liquidity. It's a bugbear for me. I think there's lots of people that don't really get financed so well in recruitment. I think there's a lot of average advice, but anyway, that's my views. You know, understand liquidity, survive, and then recruiters are bloody resilient. UK recruiters do incredibly well in the UK and obviously further afield, and I think they'll come through it and find opportunity. They pretty much always do. Okay,
Dugald, I'm going to ask you for a one-word answer, which is going to put you on the spot. So bear with me, I'm warning you ahead. But we did have a question. It was a more long-winded one, but the one-word answer is where I'm going to go for. Do you also agree, as an outsourced business, that you and indeed other competitors or contemporaries of yours should not only be looking after their staff and their customers, but maybe their supplier base, the 400 recruitment companies that supply staff to you, yeah. Should you also be putting them on your list? This is your one-word answer opportunity.
If it's one word, yes. Yes.
Right answer.
Right answer. That was a bit of a, yeah, that was an opportunity, and you froze, funnily enough, at the moment that I was waiting for it. Okay, on that fantastic answer, let me close off this APSCo Question Time live session. I want to thank our panel, Richard Prime from Sonovate, for being fantastic with regard to his facts, his figures, and for providing a great service to recruitment companies with regard to financing. Do speak to him there and his team there, because we hear a lot of fantastic stuff with regard to that service. Can I thank you to Dugald, who's come and given us the big company, the RPO MSP view, which I think is interesting. And we did all hear him say he is going to be looking after recruitment companies that supply to him. He's got a reputation of doing that anyway, but let's hope it's even better from here forward. To Tania Bowers, legal counsel at APSCo, for keeping us up to date. I'm interested on Friday and what the Chancellor says. We do need to know. The minute we hear more separately on Brexit, I think is going to add value to us doing that modelling that we're all having to do for our business. I'd like to thank all of our panel members. Thank to everybody who's listening. Please stay safe. I think the stay alert scenario was changed after Cummings to stay elite, which I sort of get and I rather smiled about. But what I would say is stay safe. Thank you very much indeed to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne.
Bye.